It's January 12, Ukraine Media Center confirms starts its operation, and my name is Svetlana Cheparenko. Now, within the main discussion platform of Ukraine, we will be talking about the political prisoners of Kremlin, about what's going on with Ukrainians who are kept by the Russians behind the bars. There's a reason we talk about it, because 12th of January is the day of the political prisoner of Ukraine, which is commemorated since 1975. It was established by Vyacheslav Chornovil to resist the oppressions of the Russian Soviet regime. It's been almost 50 years since that date, but Russia keeps doing the same to Ukrainians who dare to express their opinions. So the participants of today's discussion are Olha Skrypnyk, the head of Crimean human rights group, Yevhenii Yaroshenko, CrimeaSOS analyst, and Krystryna Shkudor. Where are our people? Campaign advocacy manager, PR Army NGO. So, Ms. Olha, let's start our conversation with you. So, who are those people persecuted by Russia for almost 10 years? It all started in Crimea, in occupied parts of Donbas. It all goes on since the 24th of February 2022. So who are those people, and what does the occupational authority incriminate them? Well, good morning. First of all, I want to thank our armed forces for this opportunity to continue working, and I want to thank all the journalists who continue giving publicity to the truth. It's very important. I appreciate your attention to the issue of political prisoners. Yes, today is the day of the political prisoner in Ukraine. Unfortunately, we're facing this problem again through some kind of transformation of occupational Soviet regime promoted by Russian Federation, and those political cases within the framework of Russian aggression, they all started probably in Crimea in 2014. Talking about the general things, it's not a new topic, because other countries that persecute the political prisoners, they persecute them inside of their countries due to political motives, and relying upon that, the Council of Europe identified the criteria of political prisoners. There is an approved resolution which describes what should the case contain to be able to say that the motives are of political nature. So first of all, there is no real crime. It's just when the criminal law is used to put a person behind the bars if they represent opposition, if they resist, and so on and so forth. Talking about the occupied territories, first of all, we're talking about our citizens who, one way or another, continue resisting the occupation and Russian Federation. In Crimea, it all started with dissent against the occupation. It all started in February 2020, or in 2014 in Crimea. I'm from Crimea myself. I'm from Yalta. I was taking part in those protests, so I can say for sure that Crimea supported Maidan, and that was an intense signal for the occupational authorities, because Russia started the operation capturing Crimea. Meanwhile, all the attention of all Ukrainians was focused on execution of people in Maidan. However, there were Crimean theater people, Majlis, civil unions, Crimean Maidan activists. Our activities were of systemic manner, and on the 12th of January, today is the day of resistance. And on the 12th of January, back then, the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people urged everybody to come to the Crimean parliament building to demonstrate to Russia that Crimeans do not agree with occupation. Nobody expects Russia. Nobody waits for Russia to be there. And later on, it would transform into one of the criminal cases, which is called 26th of January. And within the framework of that case, Akhtem Chigos was put behind the bars. He's the deputy of head of Majlis, and he's one of the examples why people started getting persecuted in Crimea. In the beginning of occupation, Russia has deployed the system of violent abductions, in fact abductions of the activists, and Rishat Ametom became the first victim of such abduction, a Crimean tater who walked out to such a manifestation. And it continued in a series of abductions of Crimean theater activists. The whereabouts of some of them are still unidentified, and starting from the year 2015, when Russian Federation continued and expanded the violation of international humanitarian law, they proceeded from violent abductions to building their oppressive system based on the Russian legislation. Basically, the standards of Russian criminal code are so vague, so ambiguous, and sometimes they are set forth directly to persecute those who disagree with Crimea. Russian Federation had a good practice of such activities in their territory, in Russian Federation, and for them it's standard to kill their kids as they did in Beslan in school. So Russia had a very extensive experience that they brought to Crimea, and starting from 2015 they start all those criminal cases. But before that there was a case of Alexei Sentsov, who was detained. I think everybody knows this former political prisoner, our film director and currently a defender who is in the ranks of the armed forces. It was a famous case. Then Valentin Lagivsky was detained in 2014 under the espionage case, and after that Russia continues, as we see now, to build specific schemes based on which they can persecute not only specific people but the whole groups of people, and my colleagues can elaborate on that. And talking about Crimean Tatar people who were resistant since the beginning of occupation, Russia uses so-called anti-terroristic legislation of Russia against them. Yevhenii can say more about that. It's very convenient for them. Russia has this experience of using terroristic articles to persecute Muslims. And I think there is a reason why Viktor Palagin, he's a Russian, he was the first head of Russian FSB in Crimea, and he had a lot of experience of persecuting Muslims, for example, in Bashkiria, and then he moved to Crimea to start building the system for oppression and persecutions of Crimean Tatars, which started with searches and then transformed into criminal cases. And if we monitor those cases, it's so obvious that those cases are fabricated. They're fabricated based on non-existent evidences. There's the biggest group of cases under terroristic articles when the Crimean Tatars are accused of participation in Hizbut Tahrir. But when you read about the lives of those people, about their activism, it becomes obvious that is their civil position which became the reason for their detention. Yet another widespread case is the persecution for participation or membership in Crimean Tatar Battalion of Chalybidzehan, because Russia described it so, or set it forth so in their legislation, that everybody is supposed to come to FSB and claim their or like announce their membership in any such organization. And there are dozens of such people who are currently behind the bars based on cases like that. So the first slide is just a couple of examples. Today, according to the data from Crimean Human Rights Group, at least, well, we're talking about those verified whose conviction is confirmed. So more than 180 citizens, for example, Emir Hussein Kuku, who was detained as the system of persecution under terroristic articles was being built. He is a human rights activist. He was searching for the people abducted by Russian Federation, specifically in 2014, and that became the real case why he was put behind the bar. Or, for example, a case of Galina Dolgopolova, who is 69 years old. She was Ukrainian. He was publicly outspoken about that while living in Sevastopol. And it became a reason when the FSB officials attempted to build a criminal case around her, as if there is an underground group of women existing which act in the interests of Ukraine. It's quite a typical case, it's quite a standard case for persecution of Ukrainians. So you can only imagine about the way it happens in relation to Ukrainians, to the Maidan activists, the accusations of high treason, which contemplates the sentence of more than 12 years, accusation of preserving and storage of weapons, terrorism, and stuff like that. Again, all those cases are fabricated with no existing evidences. These cases are usually assigned the status of classified cases when the court proceedings are going on in closed mode, and the authorities try to conceal everything. So talking about those cases with espionage, all those people, they were becoming the victims of tortures because the FSB were in fact beating out the evidences from people, evidences against themselves, and they love this practice when they make records of such coming outs for the internal consumer, for the Russians to continue believing in the evil Bandera adherents, and so they continue believing that everybody in Ukraine is a representative of state security service. So all those videos about our citizens who recognize their guilt is an example of Russian propaganda when people are used for propaganda purposes. Again, in Sevastopol, there was a case when our people were detained. Alexei Bessarabov and Metro Shtiblikov, they were detained, and there was a number of propaganda videos built around them as if there are spies. There was a lot of fabricated footage, even as they were detained. So they were detained in one place, then they were brought to a forest, and the footage was made there. So there was a made-up storage of weapons, but all these videos, they work for Russian propaganda. The real people are staying behind the real bars for the unreal crimes that they never committed. And another problem is not only that those people are innocent, but is the conditions they're staying in. In fact, those conditions are of threat to life, and our citizens start dying of that. In 23rd, there were first cases when 2 of our citizens who were political prisoners who died in Russia. First, Konstantin Shirin, who was accused of espionage and cases alike against Ukrainians. He was in need of heart surgery, and Russian colony consciously did not provide any medical aid to him. And in a couple of days, Jamil Gafarov died, another Crimean theater activist. Everybody knew that he was in need of medical attention. He was not supposed to be under such conditions given his health, and Russia is directly responsible for his death. May we put another slide on the screen? So after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, situation has not changed. The second slide, if I mean, oh, you can switch it there. Yeah, so Russia has not stopped, and people continue resisting, just like Bogdan Ziza, who after the events in Bucha and Borodyanka, he walked out for the protest. He knew he would be convicted. He was accused of terrorism, and he got sentenced to 15 years. But even every single court meeting was transformed by him into a protest manifestation. He could cooperate, he could improve his conditions, but he consciously didn't do that. And during every meeting he was announcing the list of political prisoners of Crimea, and he demanded their liberation. And during his last word, he quoted Ukrainian poems. So his resistance continues, and this is exactly what he was put behind the bars for. Irina Danilovich, she was writing about the problems in the healthcare area, and under the fabricated case, she was abducted, she was tortured, and now she is confined and sentenced to 7 years, and the so-called appeal cut that term for 1 month only, and her position, her resistance, and her spreading the truth were the real reasons for her incarceration. And to wrap it up, I would like to mention the consequences of the full-scale invasion, which resulted in the fact that Crimea has become a big prison for our citizens after the 24th of February, when Russia occupied new territories, part of Zaporizhia and Kherson region. Crimea has become prison for civilians from those regions. First of all, the civilians, they were abducted, severely tortured, and some of the people did not survive such tortures. Then those tortured people were brought to Crimea, and we started documenting such cases, the first of such cases in March 2022, when people from the south started emerging in their confinement cells, severely beaten with no opportunity to report about their whereabouts. And in summer 2022, Russia opens yet another confinement cell number 2 in Simferopol, and now they've opened yet another one, number 8. So according to their official information, you see that the number of places of confinement continues growing. So Russia continues abducting our citizens, bringing them to temporarily occupied Crimea. They open the cases about against the volunteers. They traditionally open the cases against volunteers for international terrorism, against other people. They, if they are the protesters, you remember Kherson, when a lot of our people walked out to the protest against Russian tanks with Ukrainian flags, and then the participants of such manifestations were brought to temporarily occupied Crimea, and they are behind the bars now. And what's frightening is that after so-called investigation, these people start being brought to Russian Federation, where we don't have any opportunity to search for them. A fraction of activists are in the incommunicado status, when Russia does not even confirm their existence. They do not exist on any list. We know, for example, that there is a major from Olha who is in confinement cell in Simferopol, but he was never confirmed by Russia, and we know about other activists who are being held there without any criminal status, and in fact there can be no lawyer coming to them, checking out their conditions. They stay in this confinement cell in Simferopol, either number 2 or number 8, and they have no opportunity to report about their whereabouts to their relatives. And we continue documenting more and more people whom Russia brings from occupied regions to occupied Simferopol. So it's in brief about this system. I know that Mr. Yevhen can continue and tell you more details about this problem, and I appreciate all your questions. Please don't hesitate to ask them. Thank you very much, Ms. Olga. Mr. Yevhen, can you please tell us in details about the way Russian Federation builds this repressive system within 10 years? So what are the trends that you were able to observe based on the practices of persecution of our citizens by Russian Federation? Good afternoon. First of all, a lot of thanks to the armed forces of Ukraine for this opportunity to gather in the center of Kiev. So Russia did not only abducted or steal 20% of our sovereign territories. Russia also has stolen freedom from hundreds of people in those occupied territories, and hundreds of thousands of our citizens live in fright that they will end up in the places of confinement or be killed. So if we observe the repressions in Crimea within these 10 years of occupation, we can segregate them into 5 conditional stages of persecution. First stage that has taken place is within the first month of occupation. two groups of people ended up there on which the repressions were focused. First, pro-Ukrainian activists, the adherents of territorial integrity of Ukraine, as well as Ukrainian journalists. So the journalists are the biggest enemies of Russian world. Another stage, the following stage, is the focusing on Crimean Tatar people, not only from Majlis, including deputy heads of Majlis like Akhtem Cheygos and Akhti Umerov. And during this time, there is also the emergence of patterns due to political reasons. The religious groups who refuse to work with the spiritual department of Muslims of Crimea, who try to preserve religious autonomy against the occupiers' controlled structures. And in 2017, Jehovah's Witnesses end up under persecution because they were recognized as terroristic organization in Russian Federation. The following stage of repressions outlines the persecution of civil activists, the activists of Crimean Solidarity, the union of relatives of political prisoners who support the families of political prisoners. After the 24th of February 2022, there are more and more persecutions for anti-war or pro-Ukrainian opinions. The persecution for anti-war opinion became possible thanks to the approval of amendments to Russian legislation and adding of this article for discreditation of Russian army. And within the years 22-23, there were 560 cases to bring people to administrative liability for discrediting Russian armed forces. But it's worth mentioning that if such discrediting is committed for the second case within a year, it entails criminal liability, and 6 persons got sentences based on those articles, sentences that contemplate like real sentencing in prisons. And Crimean Tatars ended up under risks. Those who reside in the newly occupied territory, specifically in Genishevsk region, many of them, as Olha mentioned, are accused of membership in battalion of Naliman Cherobidjikhan. This article has become a convenient reason for persecution of participants of Crimean blockade, and now everybody in newly occupied territories is under risk. Among those who demonstrate pro-Ukrainian position in Kherson, in Melitopol, those who were participating in manifestations and demonstrations, they are accused of espionage. And the fifth stage, is the stage of persecution of independent lawyers. They are being repressed in a form of administrative arrest or administrative penalties, but such persecution can also entail some further criminal accusations or accusations in criminal activities. So it's important for the representatives of civil society to stop this threat, this threatening tendency. I would like to stop specifically on the cases of Hizb al-Tahrir. Hizb al-Tahrir al-Islami is a political party which is legal in Ukraine and majority of the countries of the world. However, since 2003, they are recognized as terroristic organization in Russian Federation. In Crimea, within the years of occupation, 107 persons has become the victims of persecution based on accusations of membership in Hizb al-Tahrir. It's difficult to say whether those people were real members of that organization, specifically in Ukraine, because what was really happening, they were planted some literature that was put in, for example, like shoe cabinets in the kitchens, in the cabinets with the somewhere in the cellars. And for what I know, the Muslims, they don't keep their sacred literature in places like that. There were even cases when in the attic among the books covered in dust, the FSB representatives identified a book which is considered to be prohibited. It was brand new, clean. So there are all evidences of such literature being planted into the places of residence of persecuted persons. Another reason is conversations on political topics, which are frequently deciphered by the linguistic experts in one place, in one institution in Bashkortostan, which closely cooperates with FSB. So this testing, this linguistic testing, is politically biased, or we have reasons to say so. And another third category are the political prisoners, in relation of which the Russians refuse to disclose their personalities during their political persecutions. So who end up under persecution based on accusations of membership in terroristic organizations? First of all, they're the religious communities who demonstrate disloyalty to the religious organizations under control of the occupiers. So at least 2 political prisoners are the members of Muslim religious community Alushta. This community is being persecuted on systemic basis. For example, in November last year, there were searches at homes of 4 members of this union, and based on such accusations, more and more people, more and more civil activists and journalists end up under persecution. Those who visit the court proceedings, who come to the political prisoners, handing over some aid from the relatives to the political prisoners as they are kept behind the bars. And then what's worth giving publicity to is that Article 205.5 of Criminal Code of Russian Federation has become a very convenient instrument for oppression, specifically for oppression of Crimean Tatar activists. Crimea is in the 3rd place among the regions by the number of convicts based on their membership or so-called membership in Hizbut Tahrir, like Viktor Palagin, whom Russians brought from Bashkortostan. He established this system, and it's unchanged in terms of their repressive traditions. We can observe the whole families where 2 or more people are being currently repressed exist in Crimea, like brothers Timur and Zaymin Abdullayev, Ernest and Enver Seytasmanov, Ruslan and Iskander Suleimanov, Enver and Ekrem Krosh, the brothers, father and son Enver and Reza Umerovs. There is a family of Seytamerovs where in August 2023 the FSB representatives has taken away the 3rd son under accusations like that. Or there is the threat of more than 20 years sentence or life sentence for membership in Hizbut Tahrir. The severe sentence was made to Ansar Asmanov. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison in summer last year. Before that, only Oleg Sentsov was getting equal or equally severe term. What else do we need to understand? The majority of those being imprisoned, they were persecuted before that, but in the form of using administrative code against them. For example, Enver Krosh, before his arrest, there was a search at his place of residence. He was subject to administrative arrest for a couple of days. And the same story is with Vilen Tamaryanov and many other activists. So it's important not only for the human rights representatives and organizations representatives and journalists to react to such criminal persecution, but also to administrative persecution, because when there is a wave of searches with further arrests, the names of many political prisoners, for us, they are not new. And we continue keeping track of this based on how from the beginning the enforcement machine, with the help of repressions, wanted to intimidate them, but such intimidations didn't work. And moreover, such people end up being repressed who refused to cooperate earlier. For example, among the Hizbu al-Tahrir cases, there is Enver Krosh, Zakariya Muratov, who refused to cooperate with FSB. Arsen Japarov, after he refused, he was deprived of his driver's license, he was fired from his job, and in 2 weeks he was arrested. Enver Krosh in 2015 was brought to a police department where he was electrocuted, and they wanted to force him to cooperate, but it never worked. And in 7 years he was visited with a search, and he was taken away from his residence, and there is a threat of life sentence for him. And finally, where are those political prisoners being sent? So we continue observing that the geography of imprisonment continues growing. According to international humanitarian law, even if people really commit crimes, they are supposed to be convicted in occupied territories, and they are supposed to be sentenced in occupied territories. But in case of Crimea, Russia continues ignoring all the standards of international humanitarian law, and they continue bringing the imprisoned people to Salavat in Bashkortostan, to Northern Caucasus, to the such regions as Priuralya. And lately we even document cases of political prisoners ending up in Krasnoyarsk Krai and Chelyabinsk region. For example, Nariman Jalal, the deputy head of Mejlis of Crimean Tatar people, in the end of the last year was sent to the colony in the city in Minusинsk in Krasnodar region. So those are the places that we would never guess where they are unless Russia commits their atrocities. So what does it mean that for the family it's very costly to visit their imprisoned relatives? It takes a lot of time to get to Salavat. It's 2,500 kilometers from Crimea. And it's a different climate there. In Crimea it's relatively warm, unlike in Krasnoyarsk region. And during transportation, they don't allow the prisoners to have any warm clothing with them. And it's a serious challenge for families. The payment for lawyer services, not all of the lawyers, due to financial restrictions, are able to go to such places as Ural or Siberia or visit their relatives elsewhere in remote regions of Russia. So I can continue talking on and on about repressions, so I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much, Mr. Yevhen. Many human rights activists, many organizations try to help Crimean political prisoners. PR Army is also involved in this work. Ms. Khrystyna, can you please tell us about your activities? Thank you very much for visiting. I appreciate everyone who visits us offline and watching us online. My human rights colleagues, they are doing the human rights protection job. We are more of a peer people, and we are involved in publicity of information. But when we talk about political prisoners and civil hostages, they multiply exponentially. You know, the matter of popularization of the cases and publicity of those cases is very useful in one aspect, because the more people know about this or that case, about this or that hostage, the more are the chances that they would be exchanged, liberated, or else. And the negative side of it is the information from the office of the president, and not only from them, that when a case becomes very popular, for example, when we talk about Sentsov, whose case was mentioned here, so liberation of such person becomes very complicated, because Russia starts manipulating in those cases, and they try to add more and more bonuses for themselves. So publicity of such information about the political prisoners and civil hostages, there is a small nuance. We do professionally what we can. We talk about the atrocities of Russian Federation and their inhuman treatment of Ukrainians, and in fact genocide of Ukrainian people. But again, I can talk on and on, but talking about the political prisoners of Kremlin, which are the main topic of today's conversation. My colleagues stopped on Crimea because it all started there. Well, it did not start in Crimea. It started as soon as the Russian Empire was established, because they do it to all of the nations, not only to Ukrainians, within the whole of their history. But this notion can be expanded, because after the beginning of the full-scale invasion in 2022, in fact, all of the newly occupied territories can be called, all the people in newly occupied territories can be called political prisoners and civil hostages, specifically those who do not agree with the Kremlin's policies. This is why now we cannot say like there are political prisoners. You know, this notion evolved a lot, in my opinion, because if we talk, say, about the teachers in Berdansk or Melitopol who refused to teach children under Russian program, are they political prisoners? Are they criminals? No, they're being convicted of just being Ukrainians. In Kherson, a director of foster home who was keeping children in the basement so they are not found by Russian soldiers and deported to Russian Federation, he was not able to save them. He was risking his life to keep those children in Ukraine, but he didn't make it. And those cases are multiplying. If we remember the case of Mikita Khangalov and Tigran Aghaniyan, the teenagers who were shot by Russian Federation, they are children. They were underage and they were executed. They were shot for being Ukrainians. Let me give you just a little bit of statistics. PR Army is involved in pitching the topics related to Ukraine and different problems for foreign and Ukrainian mass media. So the case of Mikita and Tigran, even before they died, we disseminated information about their case across foreign mass media. If someone does not remember, they were from Berdansk and they were tearing apart the Russian banners, and they were proclaiming Berdansk to be Ukraine, and they were tortured, and then they were forced to come to investigation officer for check-ins. And when those children realized that they end up behind the bars once again, they've done. Why one of them was shot in the head by a sniper and another one was shot directly in the heart by a sniper. So they didn't even want to keep the lives of those Ukrainian teenagers to, I don't know, perform some fair investigation under some so-called Russian criminal code, even in case they violated anything. So we've sent those news to foreign media, and for your understanding, the statistics of opening was like 30%. After their death, the opening statistics was like 60%, and there was a series of materials issued about 2 teenagers in foreign media, in number of foreign media. In my opinion, it's a tragedy. It's about the lives of people, of young Ukrainians who had all their lives ahead of them and who paid with their lives for being Ukrainians. It all demonstrates that Russia wants to do in this Russian world, and this is why they need the Ukrainian territory for. Shouldn't it be for the armed forces of Ukraine, we wouldn't be sitting here and talking about some hypothetical crimes of Crimea, because we would all be behind the bars. Well, me and my colleagues for sure. What I'm trying to say is that now, unfortunately, the conditional limit between the political prisoners and civil hostages is being erased. We had a series of materials. The experts were saying the better is the success of Ukrainian armed forces in the battlefield, the bigger is the number of political prisoners and civil hostages in Russia, because as soon as Ukrainian armed forces advance in the occupied territories, Russian soldiers just come to the homes of people randomly and just grabbing them under the premises, like as if they were given the coordinates of the positions of the armed forces of Russian Federation in occupied territories and conveying them to Ukrainian army. So any made-up crimes, any fabricated crimes, the people are detained under such accusations. We all have to continue fighting, everybody in our fronts, in the human rights front, in the media front. We all do our best, but we have to realize it's normal to accept it, that Russia does not recognize any international law. We talk about the violation of Geneva Convention, but they do not recognize any international laws. And in Russian Federation, there is a law that allows them not to recognize the international law. So they've made this law for themselves, and they live under that law. So PR Army and Where Are Our People project, where we cover the problems of deported people, we deal with bringing the deported people back, both adult and children. And we say there is no magic pill, there is no magic stick that we wave at all the political prisoners and civil hostages are set free and they are being brought to Ukraine. And it's only the full defeat of Russian Federation in the battlefield and the complete victory of Ukraine will enable us to get access to our political prisoners, to our illegally deported children, illegally adopted by Russian families, and to bring them all back home, because all the other ways that we use, they don't allow us bringing all the people back. Yes, we have exchanges, we bring some individual homes, but if we talk about bringing all of them home en masse, is only the full defeat of Russian Federation, because there is nothing Russia neglects. They don't have moral laws, they don't have human laws, they have nothing sacred for themselves. And if Europe tries to find, well, you know, we work a lot of we work a lot with European and American politicians during our work. They try to find some human factor, something humane in Russia, in Russian Federation, in Russians. They try to develop some strategies, laws, resolutions. Yes, it's all very good, and because for Ukraine it becomes a reason to apply to the courts against Russia, to international courts, but it means nothing for Russia because they don't care what Europe or America says. Everything they understand is the force, only the brute force. It was always like that. So again, there is no magic pill. Please forget about it. We have to continue fighting, to continue talking, but we have to preserve and save more and more Ukrainian lives possible. It's for us the biggest challenge, the biggest priority. Because we have a lot of information about what the Russians do, about the way it happens in the occupied territories, and the worst thing they do to Ukrainian kids, as I've mentioned about Mikita and Tigran. And this is only what we know. This is only what was given publicity to, but we understand that there are thousands of cases like this. According to the data from the Ministry of Interior, there are more than 28,000 people who are missing in action in occupied territories. We don't know what happened to those people. No families know what happened to their relatives. Thank you very much, Ms. Khrystyna. It's important, obviously, to talk about the preservation of lives of Ukrainian people, children and adults, but what can we do to make sure that such successful cases, that their numbers grow? So where do we underperform? Thank you for this question. We are in a complicated situation because the majority of those processes will depend on Russia's will, and it's difficult to influence on them, but there are things that we are still supposed to do. First of all, if we talk from the point of view of the state, is the verification, is the maximum cooperation to make sure that we have the verified list of individuals. It's difficult. There was a figure 28,000 missing in action, but in fact some of them that are not missing, we have identified their whereabouts, so we have to work more closely with different registers. For example, we have a law that allows, and there is a procedure to identify the fact of imprisonment. There is a commission which I'm member of, based in the Ministry of Reintegration. So we have to identify that a person was imprisoned and they were imprisoned during Russian aggression. It's clear that those people, we've identified their whereabouts, whether the occupied territories, Crimea, Russia, and we have to make sure that those registers, they all are coordinated, because people who look for their relatives, they submit all the applications to the Ministry of Reintegration, to any other institutions. They are supposed to do so. Us as a state, we are supposed to help them to verify the list. If the people are verified, they're not supposed to be on the list of the missing in action. It's just an instrumental example where we underperform. Another thing is the help for our political prisoners and those who are set free from imprisonment. We have this law in effect already for the guarantees to the people who were imprisoned, and now only part of this law is in effect, is the extension of financial support. The people are entitled to 100,000 hryvnias per year for such expenses as visiting a colony, but you can only imagine what kind of load it is, including the financial load for those who search for their relatives who visit the colonies, if it's possible, plus additionally they're supposed to pay for some lawyer services if there are lawyers who work there. And for those who come back from captivity, they can get one-off 100,000 payment as they're back from captivity. It's good that it works, that it's good that it's in effect, but at the same time there is no solution to the issue of rehabilitation support, for medical support, even for those who were exchanged, who are brought from captivity. And so far, not all of the Cabinet of Ministers resolutions are developed to support this law. And it's surprising in a bad manner, because we have thousands of people coming back from captivity, and we should to do everything we can to make sure that this law works. And it's unfortunate that as a state we are unable to do this so far. And our partners keep saying, like, okay, let's work with this problem. And moreover, our president, Volodymyr Zelensky, he mentioned it as one of the articles on his list of bringing back the civil hostages. It's one of the peace plan. It's one of the articles of the peace plan of our presidents, and we have to provide our partners with a clear figure. It won't be 100% clear because we cannot verify everything, but we have to put things together. We have to establish proper coordination with coordination headquarters, and they are dealing with the matters of prisoners of war. Unfortunately, not all of them have been brought back home, but we know that there is a procedure, there is communication. But what are the civilians supposed to do? As a member of this commission, as a human rights person, I see another problem, how difficult it is for the civilians to confirm that they were in captivity. Russia will never issue a certificate that they were keeping a person in captivity, like, yeah, we've tortured you for 3 weeks, yeah, here's the certificate, here you go. Russia will not do it. And people from occupied territories, it turns out they have no rights, they have no ways to confirm their imprisonment, the fact of their imprisonment. They were held in captivity for 3 months, and then they were just dropped out somewhere in Melitopol. Even such people as the heads of local governments, they cannot confirm their status. So we have to develop normal procedures to make sure that people are not deprived of aid that they need. So we have things where we are underperforming, and it's important for the state to build normal communication with the relatives. They're not supposed to feel left alone. They're not supposed to knock on all the doors and even windows. It's not the way it's supposed to work. The government should establish a single window where they should knock, because the relatives, they are being sent to State Security Service, to coordination headquarters, to the office of the president. Do all of our citizens have legal education and they know how to submit such applications? No, they're not even supposed to do so. We have one single enemy, one common enemy, and we have to do everything possible to destroy them. And the war should not become a premise to release those from responsibility who are supposed to do such things. So the creation of such so-called window where relatives can come and be explained all of the procedures, where to go, what to do, what is the procedure. There are thousands of them, and they need to feel that they are needed by the government, and they need to feel that even if the state cannot do it, but they want to set their relatives free. And the relatives come to us and they tell us, like, we don't even know whether our relatives are on those lists. It shouldn't be happening that way. We can do it for sure, and I hope that this year those things will be done. Thank you very much, Ms. Olha. We have a couple of minutes for questions from the journalists. If we have any questions on the floor, please go ahead, dear journalists. Good afternoon, Olha Matarikina, Ukrinform. My question is whether we know what is the number of Ukrainians being held in incommunicated status, and what is the number of Crimean tatars among them. And yet another question, there was a name of Lilia Kamenji mentioned, and 3 more lawyers were detained with her, Nasim Sheikh Mambetam and Rustem Kamirov, whether we know anything about what's going on to them, what is their fate. Well, I'll start with the responding to part of your question. So talking about incommunicado, it's when Russia does not confirm the presence of our citizens behind the bars. Talking about Crimea, those people are mostly accused of criminal crimes that we can verify. So 180 people that I've mentioned, those are the cases of the Crimean tatars, Crimean citizens who live in Crimea. We have all the materials which confirm those cases. The situation is way more difficult with the south of Ukraine, with those who were brought to Crimea from the south of Ukraine. In one slide, I presented the information about 53 persons who were brought from Kherson and Zaporizhia regions to Crimea. So those are 53 people whom we know about 100%. We've conveyed all the information to independent United Nations Commission on investigation of war crimes in Ukraine. We can confirm the people are in prison. There are specific materials about them. So it's a perfect option, a perfect a perfect specimen that we can bring to United Nations. But in confinement cell number 2, we know that there were at least 110 people, but we can only confirm 50 or 55 of them, as the international organizations want. So we're talking about hundreds of people, and what's difficult is that the people who are in incommunicated status, that people who were detained and brought to confinement cell, they don't show up in any websites, in any court websites. The lawyers cannot visit them. If the lawyers come, the Russians just say they're not here, and we don't know what goes on to those people. The people are being transported all the time from one place to another. We have cases when people were set free, when they were released, but we only know about 3 cases like that. So they were tortured first to give, so they can provide the context of their relevant relatives who were either in law enforcement or in armed forces of Ukraine, and then they were released. So there were also cases when people were brought from Crimea to newly occupied territories, to a torture chamber in Changar. That's a huge torture chamber, and the problem is no one can get there. There are battle operations going on there, and it's a newly occupied territory. It cannot even be called a confinement cell. They call it a confinement cell, but in fact it's a torture chamber. What happens to people there? We don't even know number of people staying there. We know that there were 100 people there, and then we only can confirm 50, and again the situation is not going to improve. The numbers of such people will only grow, and as we've witnessed, as soon as Crimea is as Kherson was being liberated, they started bringing more and more people to Crimea. And I think that as Ukrainian armed forces advance further on, they will bring even more people to Crimea. They will just grab the people anywhere, counting on them being able to be exchanged further on or blackmailed or whatever. So they will continue being the civil hostages, and it will be an additional problem for us to look for them in the Russian Federation. Then thank you very much. It was quite a holistic answer about the incommunicado persons, but let me add a couple of words. You know, the figure is fluctuating every month, every week. It's been updated, so we have to keep track of the data that is being published. Also, what needs to be mentioned is this factor. It happens sometimes that a person is being kept incommunicado for a number of months, and then they get charges. They're being charged of criminal misdemeanor, and in that case we understand that it becomes a threat of a long sentence to such person. But on the other hand, it's a legal opportunity for a lawyer to visit them, and it's a recognition of the fact that such person is being detained and there is access to them. There is a chance for communication with the families, with the lawyers, and so on. So Apas Kurtament, an inhabitant of Yevhenii district, in summer 2022, he was trying to go to Turkey to meet his mother there from Crimea. And as he entered Crimea, he was detained by FSB representatives. Nothing was known about his whereabouts for 2.5 months. And only in October 2022, we found out, we've got information about him that he was staying in Simferopol confinement cell, and he was accused of handing over 500 hryvnias to his friend who is in the ranks of voluntary battalion Crimea, and now he's sentenced to 7 years. Also, there is a Spanish volunteer known as Mario from Kherson, who, according to our information, for almost 2 years is being held in incommunicado status, and his cellmate handed over an information about his presence in the confinement cell through his lawyer. And those names, Nazim Sheikh-Hambetov, Lilia Kemerji, and Ahmed Tabelev, according to the information that we have, in July 2022, the Chechen lawyers' chamber deprived them of their licenses. In fact, they are prohibited to defend their defenders or defendants under the criminal cases. In terms of persecution of lawyers, the peak of persecution of them was fallen on the year 22. In May, 4 more lawyers were detained and deprived of licenses. They were all under administrative arrest. At least 13 lawyers were oppressed in one way or another during this period of persecution. Another question will be in English. You have a headphone.
Мене звати Christopher Sampson, NetSec Media. Do we have information on international negotiations that happened on behalf of Crimean people, including especially maybe in the Muslim Ummah, where you would assume there would be some advocacy based on the oppression from Russia? Second question, do you have a way of gauging the impact of psychological pressure on the people over a decade to show how much, this much time really deeply affects the under propaganda, the sentiments, etc. Дякую.
I may address your second question with regard to psychological pressure. We must keep in mind that many families in Crimea live in a constant pressure of being prosecuted, of being searched one day at early morning at 5 or 4 a.m., of being arrested after such a search, of further imprisonment up to 20-year term. Imagine a situation when a whole village with predominant Crimean Tatar population suffers a wave of searches. This village or settlement is encircled by security officers, and it is done in so brutal way that many neighbors may consider that there is something that their neighbors are very dangerous terrorists or extremists. And when neighbors see that such a brutal wave of searches, it makes them also be scared that one day they could be followed by the same pattern of repressions. But not everyone can afford to escape such kind of repressions. Many people may think that perhaps it makes sense for some people to leave Crimea for government control area or to third countries. But imagine many families whose parents and grandparents had been struggling for the right to return to Crimea, and they cannot afford to leave their homeland again, and they have to live even under the atmosphere of terror, intimidations, and other form of psychological pressure.
Well, for what I understand, we don't have a lot more time, but just in brief, talking about the Muslims, there were attempts on the level of Ukraine, including the Office for the Commissioner of Human Rights, to have the Islamic countries involved. We're handed over the list of Crimean Tatars, first of all, who were imprisoned under political premises, and we only have one successful case when Ahtem Cheygos and Emi Umerov were returned thanks to Turkey. Those were the direct negotiations between Turkey and Russia regarding the exchange, and that was, yes, a successful case, but it doesn't have a systemic manner. So today Ukraine is continuing its efforts to communicate with the countries who can do it. This is why I mentioned the peace plan of Vladimir Zelensky. Canada has taken a lot of undertaken a lot of obligations with regard to civil hostages. And talking about any researches, it's difficult to have any researches in Crimea, whether sociological or otherwise. And not to take any more of your time, I'm ready to share hate speech research with you in Russian-speaking media. It may be of use to you. And another part of Russian propaganda, it's aimed very strictly at specific audience, the children. Religious organization, all the education system, civil organizations, they are all a part of the system of militarization of children. So, and result is creation of mobilization reserve for this war. So children aged 10 to 14, in a couple of years, they may become the soldiers of Russian Federation, because they are doing it now. Those who were 10 years old as Crimea was captured, they are in the ranks of Russian army now. And in the website of Crimean Human Rights Group, we maintain the list of Crimeans who died in the ranks of Russian army during this war. And that's a horrific figure, apart from the fact that those are the citizens who are fighting against their own people. And you may see that they are predominantly young people who were children 10 years ago. And it's the result of this influence. And it's a huge challenge that Ukraine has to cope with during or after.
So I'm advocacy manager of the project Where Are Our People. So our main focus, we are like on the deported people, adults and children. And we, this military camps for Ukrainian forced moved children, which are in Crimea especially, because it starts through Crimea, and it has all over the Russia. If you go to our website, you will see an interactive map with points where these military camps exist in Russian Federation. And what they do, they get our children and they force them to be the soldiers of the Russian Federation, because they start with this Unarmy of movement of first, and there's a lot of them. If you want more information, I can share with pleasure. But what they do, they want to destroy Ukraine from inside. And propaganda, it does work even on the temporary occupied territories, because this is the pressure they do for the people to break their spirit. That's the first aim of Russia, to break Ukraine. So that's what they does with the propaganda, and unfortunately, in most cases, it does work.
Дякую нашим спікерам. Я нагадаю, що ми говорили про політв'язнів.
I would like to thank our speakers. We were talking about the political prisoners of Crimea, about what is going on to those people who are held behind the bars by Russia. We believe in our victory, and we try to bring it closer with all the means possible. We work on a schedule for the Monday. Thank you for your attention. Stay tuned. See you shortly. Glory to Ukraine.